up, y'all? Welcome back to another episode of A Space for You. If you can't tell by the background, I am not in my own space today, but I have a very special guest here with me today. My family, my friend, my big sister, all the above, Miss Vanity Jenkins. Vanity is a phenomenal educator and DEI practitioner and consultant with more than 10 years of experience in the field. She is working on her PhD at the University of Kentucky right now. She is also the founder and owner of Shifted Consulting. So without further ado, Vanity, welcome to the space, or it's a Brendan space.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nina.
Of course, I'm so happy you could be here today. To give y'all a little bit of context, Vanity and her family were like the first family that I met and my family met when we moved to Franklin, New Jersey. I think we both kind of came
around the same time.
Yeah. So let's dive right into things. Tell me a little bit about what space you are in today.
I am in a space of healing. I think that the last couple of years have just been a lot for everybody. It's been a lot in the world happening. And then, I feel like everybody I know has been going through something, whether it's personal or professional, sometimes both. And so because of the relationships that I have in a lot of my friendships and even in the professional space, I'm often a coach for people. And so I often take on other people's problems as well. And I think that because of all of that, because of all that I have internalized or soaked up over the last couple of years, I'm just realizing that I need to pause and take care of myself. And so I'm just in the process of healing for a rebirth and growth.
I love that. Tell me a little bit about what that process is looking like. How is that going for you so far?
Yeah, I think, when people say healing, sometimes I think people think it's like, oh, let me go shopping or let me go to the mall and, buy myself something nice. And sometimes that is healing. But there are also days where healing is really hard and where you're crying about, something that you haven't let go yet, or where you are acknowledging that you've been too hard on yourself and you're forgiving yourself or apologizing to yourself or, other people in your family or your network. And so for me, I think there are a lot of peaks and valleys at the beginning of healing. Mm-hmm. And as you continue to grow, the peaks and valleys get smaller and smaller until you're on a path that's more of a straight line, acknowledging that, nothing is ever going to be perfect. And so there's always going to be little bumps. But now I'm getting to a place where I am closer, where I'm having less peaks and valleys, and I'm getting closer to some equilibrium.
I love that. I can relate to that a lot. I think the last few years, just from obviously the pandemic and everything, and some career experiences that have been challenging, which you have coached me through. So I know if I'm healing from it, I can imagine how you have needed to heal from hearing about it at all. So thank you. I think that's something that, as you were mentioning, just you coach a lot of people, take that on off and wonder who heals the healer or who helps the helper. So I'm happy to see that you're taking that for yourself.
Yep, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit more about your roots. Like I mentioned, we both grew up in New Jersey, but before then, I know the family moved around a little bit, but tell us about your roots and how that has informed who you are today.
So when I hear roots, I immediately think of my grandma. My grandma is in South Carolina. She was born in 1940. And so I just think about, what was the world like for a Black girl born in rural South Carolina in 1940. And so just to think about all that she has experienced in her lifetime, I think that she is probably my most grounding influence and definitely a big part of my healing. When whenever I'm feeling just depleted, I know I need to go and visit my grandma because I just instantly feel surrounded by an abundance of love and joy. And my grandma and my two uncles that live with her, they just pour into me so much. And I know I could do anything and my grandma is going to be like, it's okay. Like, we'll figure it out. I know it wasn't your fault. Even if it is my fault, she's going to say that it's not and like help me figure it out. And so I think that she is a large part of my grounding. And then I think also about being the oldest daughter. And just the responsibility that comes with being the oldest daughter and, you know, having siblings, especially with my youngest sister who is 14 years younger than me. So always felt like my surrogate child, even though she's not. And so I think family is really how I would define my roots, and family in a fluid manner, not, you know, necessarily the American family of, you know, mom and dad and 2.5 kids and a dog, but family more broadly to include aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, and that just fictive kinship that so many Black families have.
I love that. You make me miss my grandmother. I see sometimes when you post on Instagram, like, I crack up every time, like those reels of like, you see your mom, like, yeah, she cool, whatever. But like, grandma, like, come here. I felt that way about my dad's mother. She passed away when I was like in high school. And it's funny we're talking about this now because I have this like this cookbook that she left me, or like when I was maybe 10 or 11 years old, I loved to cook. Well, I also love to eat. With her, she taught me how to cook. As a child, she knew how much I loved being in the kitchen. And my most like prized possession that I have is this cookbook that she made for me. Like, she wrote down all of her recipes. And even though I don't think she knew how to use a computer, she had her daughter type it, print it out, bind it up into like this nice book that I have, and I keep it. Like, there's a picture of her in it with like a prayer that she wrote for me, and like I keep it on my desk. And also when I'm having those days, I'm just like, ooh. But like I feel her presence, so I'm happy that like your grandmother is still here in this sense to like experience that. Yeah,
it's such a blessing. I mean, I think grandmas are just so important to so many people, especially in the Black family. And so I definitely feel very, very blessed to still be able to see her.
Yeah. Now, speaking of family, I know you are a mother as well. So tell me a little bit about like what it's like managing I could imagine super busy in your career, getting your PhD right now. How do you like balance that all and still raise this beautiful little girl? You can't see Zoe, but she's over in the corner over there. How do you manage it all and like raising this beautiful and wonderful child now?
Yeah, I'm not going to lie and say that it's easy. It is very hard, and some days it's harder than other days. I think one of the hardest things for me, I'm an introvert. And so I like my alone time. I like to, you know, be able to do my own thing. And as a mom, there are lots of times where I cannot do that at all. And my daughter is a Libra, and she is very clingy and like very attached to me. I joke and call her my stalker all the time. But sometimes I'm like, no, y'all, I need help. Like, I'm really being stalked. She won't give me an inch. And so I think like that was definitely something that I had to learn how to manage for myself, like figure out what is going to be my alone time. How am I going to still have that? When you have a child who, you know, children didn't ask to be here. And so if you need me, or if you need, you know, 10 hugs a day, it's probably 100 with her. I'm also like not a physical person. And so that was something that I had to learn about as well. Cause I'm like, okay, fine. Like, you really need another hug. I remember when she was younger, and I would ask like, oh, do you need a hug? And every time she said yes, I would just be shocked. Cause I'm like, why do you need a hug, girl? I just saw you. Like, move away from me. But yeah, that was definitely something that I had to learn how to just manage and how to make sure that I was there for what she needed and that I was also giving myself that time. And I think that that's a similar through line for all of those different pieces. And so luckily this semester in school, I've had 2 people of color as my professors who have just been phenomenal. One of whom is a mother scholar. That's how she defines herself. And she also got her PhD while being a single mother of 3. Wow. And so I've been able to talk to them and build really strong relationships with both of them. And so, you know, they give me a little grace when assignments are late or not on time, which has just made it so much easier. And so, you know, there are days where I had to, reconcile with myself. There is no way that you're going to get this done on time. And that's okay. Like, deadlines aren't real for real. Like, all time is a construct. And so, when I was in undergrad, I was much more type A. Like, I remember I only turned in one paper late, and I turned it in late by accident, and I actually had it done by the due date, but I just thought it was due later. I had a whole meltdown. Like, I'm crying on the floor. I'm calling my professor. I'm calling other professors. Like, please tell her I didn't mean, like, just having a meltdown. And now, like, this semester, I probably turned in at least half of my assignments late. But I had to, like, learn how to let that be okay. Because I can't, have a meltdown as a mom like every other day because I'm turning in something late. And so you just have to learn what your parameters are as a mom and know that they are fluid and that they're going to change, and that you can't get an A+ in everything every day. And so for me, I want to make sure that I'm getting as high a mark as possible in the mom category every day. But that means either work is going to also get an A that day, or school, or the business, but not all of them. And so just figuring out how to have that flexibility and fluidity.
That's real. That's real. You remind me so much of myself in so many ways. I think, like, for as long as we've known each other, like, my sister was your friend.
Yeah.
Initially, y'all are the same age, and your brother is my friend because we are the same age. But I feel like you and I are, like, two sides of the same coin. Is that the expression? Yeah, like, very similar. So as you're describing that, I'm like, I have those thoughts sometimes where I get nervous about, like, becoming a mother someday, where I'm like, I'm so introverted and like I spend so much time by myself right now, where I'm like, I don't even know how it's gonna work, like, bringing a man into this fold, let alone a child that, like, actually, like, needs that, like, nurturing and support, and, like, similar, like, physical affection is, like, I think I score a 0 on that, literally. And, like, the love language, I'll never forget.
It's my last one.
Same.
Every time.
Yep. Same. Like, and I take it regularly, and it's still the same. Yep. But, like, I remember in my first job, we were doing, like, a team building activity, and we, for some reason, were taking a love languages quiz. And everybody had, like, physical affection, like, in 1 or 2 were, like, in the top. And mine was literally 0. And they were like, you really don't like a pound or, like, a high five that you did? I was like, no. Don't touch me. So, like,
literally, do not touch me.
Yeah, I don't. But, like, I think I take a lot away from what you're talking about, and, like, that you can't get an A in every area. And I think that's something that a lot of Black women can struggle with, where, like, we are taught, whether it's directly or indirectly, or just from, like, what we observe in the world, that we don't have a choice, or it feels like we don't have anything but a choice but to be perfect in what we do. So how did you, like, start breaking out of that, and how have you felt that you've been supported or, like, unsupported maybe in, like, the working environments that you've been in?
Yeah, it's hard. I actually, I almost had a debate with my dad about this a couple weeks ago, but I decided not to take the bait and have the debate. But I had asked him to read something for school, and it wasn't like a big project, just a reflection paper or something. And he, said this phrase that he used to always say to us about excellence, and how, Black excellence, you need to be great, like, yada, yada, yada. And in that moment, I was like, everything doesn't have to be excellent, Dad. Like, I'm not going to be excellent all the time, and that's okay. I don't have to be excellent all the time. Like, that is such a burden. That is so much pressure to expect yourself to be excellent or to be perfect in every minute of every day. And I understand why, the generations before us had that mindset. And I understand why, in the way the world was situated. And, he grew up right after segregation in South Carolina. His brother actually integrated the high school there. Wow. And so I absolutely understand where that mindset comes from, and why, his parents taught that to him, and he in turn is teaching it to us. But I think we are at a place today where people are really starting to understand the extent to which capitalism has infected our society, and the extent to which white supremacy culture has affected our society. And those are the places where we get those messages around perfection, or those messages around, having to be excellent all the time, and that's just something that I just simply no longer believe. And especially in the workplace, to your point, Nina, around Black women taking on so much. So often in work contexts, we are not supported. We are put in positions where we don't have the tools to survive. We don't have the tools to thrive. We're set up for failure often. And a lot of the ways that we try to combat that is to try to be perfect and to try to prove everybody at the organization wrong. And so we stay later and, we work more and we double, triple check every email before we send it out. And we overanalyze every interaction and conversation that we had to try and prove our humanity, essentially, and try to prove that we are worth the respect that we're not getting, or to try and prove that we are smarter than the assumptions that people are making from us. And what I have learned, that instead of trying to prove people wrong in those settings and contexts, it is better for me to leave that type of environment. And so I'm a big believer in go where you are celebrated, not where you're tolerated. And I think part of what Black women have to do, especially in the workplace, is to really think through, how is this impacting my health? How is this impacting me spiritually, physically, emotionally, mentally? And is it worth it? Like, do I really want to take on all of this extra work to prove all of these people wrong when they had no reason to make that assumption in the first place? Like, why am I fighting this battle to prove someone wrong who never even gave me the benefit of the doubt? And so I think that's what I coach women on a lot, because we often don't understand in real time the impact that stress can have on our bodies. And so often, I have seen real health implications from, strokes and heart attacks and just random conditions coming up in people's bodies that are so often connected to stress. And I think that we are in a place now where there are so many opportunities out there that you don't have to take that type of abuse. I think the other thing is, generationally, our parents used to stay in one job for 30 or 40 years. Yeah. And I remember when I first started thinking about leaving one of my jobs, both my dad and my uncle were like, well, you're always going to hate your boss. Like, you just got to learn how to deal with it. And I was like, no. I'm not. Like, I don't know. Do y'all know me? That is not going to work for me. Nina, I know you know me. Yeah. I'm like, that is never going to rock with me. Like, I'm going to end up cussing this lady out or fighting or, I can't just take it day and day and day. Like, it's not going to work. And so I think that's also very freeing, because you don't have to stay somewhere forever. And if a place isn't giving you what you need, and if you don't see a way for that organization to improve, then it's time to go. And I'm not saying, leave the first time somebody says something to you or the first time that there's conflict. I've stayed in organizations and been a part of a transformation at an organization. And so that is possible, but you have to know how ripe the organization is for actually changing. And sometimes they're not, and that's cool, but get somebody else to do it, because it's not going to be me.
Wow. I feel like this is the whole episode right here. Like, there's so much that I want to pull from that. I think that so for those who don't know, like, Vanity has a fellowship program called Authentically Me. I was in the latest cohort of that earlier this year. And I came to that program at a time where I was going through really, really stressful working experience that I was having. And there was something you said about the health impacts it can have. I can remember earlier on in my career, again, going through another experience like that. And it sank me into the deepest depression. I remember as I was slowly starting to work my way out of it, a year or more after the fact, friends were like, yeah, we haven't seen or heard from you in forever. And it hadn't even dawned on me in that moment that I had been that disconnected. I gained, oh my God, at least 30 to 40 pounds. Like I looked and felt nothing like myself. And like some of those health conditions that you talk about, like I think that's where a lot of Black women who struggle with like autoimmune disorders, chronic illnesses and conditions that oftentimes thankfully can be reversed, you know, with intentional changes in their diet or whatever the case may be, working with, you know, their health providers. But it takes a toll. And you remind me a lot, like when you mentioned leaving roles, parents who stayed. My mom, I think you remind me of us in a lot of ways, where I think she was an early version of you in a lot of ways, where she used to talk about it a lot, but like as a kid, it didn't connect with me. Like what she meant were like, she's just walked out from jobs or like cussed somebody out. And like in my mind, I'm like, that's just Karima being Karima. And like, I would never do something like that. But the older I've gotten, I'm like, you know what? She was onto something. And like, I can remember as a kid, one instance where she left the role and she didn't have anything lined up. She was out of work for at least 5 years after that. And for me, it kind of set that tone of like, okay, you never leave something unless you have it lined up. But I think going through what I've been through in my career now, has given me so much empathy for her. And like, I've apologized to her for how the perspective that I held as a kid that was very immature and not understanding this. And part of me almost feels kind of stupid to some degree that like I did not connect that. Like, okay, there is racism in the world and you knew you was going to find it in school and just randomly, you know, occurrences with people. But I don't know how it didn't click in my mind that was going to happen like at work. And there was nothing that could have prepared me, like, or nothing that did prepare me like for what that experience would be. And I've talked to so many of my friends and I feel like most, if not all of them, if not, you know, at the same time, that at some point have been like either deeply unhappy in their roles or feeling disrespected, undervalued in their careers. So for women who are going through that, like, what do you say to them? Like, where do you begin to like, I hate to say lift yourself out of that, because I know the onus is not on us, but like, how do you start to kind of see the light, like when you are in a situation like that you feel devalued in?
I'm going to answer that in a second. But first, I want to offer you some grace about how you approach or how you viewed your mom as a child. Because remember, in this racist, patriarchal, capitalistic society, we are systematically taught not to value moms or motherhood, right? And so we're systematically taught that women are just over dramatic and, you know, they're not rational and they just make decisions off of emotions. And so that teaches us to look at choices that our mothers make from a frame of, well, she probably made the wrong choice because she's just, you know, irrational and emotional. And so I just want to offer that to you, because it's not, the onus isn't only on you. You are a child, and so much of the way that we view things is through that lens. And before we know that, we just don't know, right? Like, you don't know what you don't know. And so I think that also likely impacted how you saw your mom in that time.
It did. Not to cut you off. It did in so many ways. Like as a kid, like all I saw it as was like, okay, she ain't working. That means I can't get this Barbie or like I can't go on this trip. As far I can't have what the other kids have, like the community that we grew up in. I feel like Franklin was fairly...
Which is capitalism too, right? You wanting things and wanting what other kids have.
Yeah. But it was like an isolating experience at times where like I feel like the community we grew up in like was fairly mixed, but there's a side of Franklin that's very affluent and bougie to some degree. So growing up with friends who like had pools in their backyard and multi-million-dollar mansions, and we live in what is the equivalent of like, I wouldn't say the projects necessarily, but like we were not, you know, we made it work, you know, but it was not, you know, all that I had like idealized to be. But the more I've grown and like I connect with my mom, just like woman to woman now, I see so much more like what she meant from that. And I meant it like when I say, I'm sorry that like I didn't get it then, I didn't know it then. And the more we've talked and she shared like how friends of hers, like you mentioned, women who have had strokes and things like that, nervous breakdowns. And I'm like, well, why didn't nobody warn me about this? But like, I get it.
Yeah. And then to answer your question. So one, I think that we have to start learning the flags of when an organization is impacting our health earlier. Because to your time, the first time it happened to me, I didn't notice it until I left either. And so when I was talking to you about that boss where my uncle and dad were like, just figure it out. It was also a Black man. We can talk about that later. Okay. But I didn't realize until I was at my next job and I went to see a panel. One of my mentors, Dr. Adrienne Dixon, was on the panel with Gloria Ladson-Billings. And if you're not in the education field, she is like the Beyonce of educational research. Like everybody knows her work. She is just very, very well known. And so we're in this panel. I'm watching the panel. They're talking. And then afterwards, Dr. Dixon is like, oh, come on backstage with us. So me and Zoe are going backstage. I think Zoe was 5 at the time. And she's just talking to Gloria Ladson-Billings like she's a regular old person. I'm sitting here and all like, oh my God, I'm back here with
kids have no fear.
Zoe's like, come on, Black girls. Everybody put your hand in. Black girl magic. And Gloria Ladson-Billings is listening to her. She's like, all right, baby, come on.
I love it.
And I'm sitting there. I remember when I was leaving, I was like, I was just chilling with Gloria Ladson-Billings and I'm out here questioning my competence at work. Like I didn't realize the toll that working with that man, and I think I was only there about 6 months with him, but I didn't realize how much I had started to question my value, my worth, what I knew. And I didn't realize how much it impacted me. And similar, my friends started saying like, oh, you look so much better. I'm like, what you mean I look better? How was I looking? They were like, girl, you was pale. You was looking, you was looking crazy. I'm like, y'all ain't tell me. They was like, nah, we couldn't tell you. See, I'm like, y'all should have told me. I'm out here looking crazy, but I gained weight. I wasn't myself. I wasn't the best mother. And I realized then that I would not let any job do that to me again. And so I think that when we're starting to get those messages, like when we notice we're overworking, when we notice that we are overthinking and, proofreading an email 4 or 5 times, we have to ask ourselves, like, why am I doing that? What if I forget a period? What if I spell a word wrong? What's going to happen? And if the answer to that question is someone is going to think X about me, or I'm going to get reprimanded, or, yada, yada, yada. If the consequence for making that type of mistake doesn't match the mistake, then what is that telling us about the organizational culture? And how can we either shift it so that it is a place where we can thrive? Or how do we start to get our ducks in a row so that we can go somewhere else?
I want to explore both of those paths with you. So say you work through that and you realize, okay, this is not going to work for me. How would you advise, other women to like start getting their ducks in a row and getting out?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is really important is understanding what your personal values are. And so, there are lots of activities you can Google online to figure out, what are your personal values. But after you figure out, your 3 personal values, thinking about what types of work can you do that align to those values? What types of work will give you the space where you can reflect those values in your day-to-day work? And then, reach out to your network and say, hey, I am thinking about transitioning. Here are the types of jobs that I'm interested in. Please connect me with anyone that you may know who can help me along this path. I think your personal network is something that is often underused, especially for women of color. And so, people say all the time, it's not about what you know, is who you know, right? And so white folks have been using nepotism in their personal networks for decades to get ahead. And so often for women of color, we are not accustomed to asking for help, so we don't. And so, we're struggling at work and we're not telling anybody. And we're struggling at work and we're getting depressed and we're still not telling anybody. And now we're struggling at work and we're trying to find a job, which is a whole, that can feel like a full-time job. And we're still not telling anybody. And so we're just taking on and on and on. We're not spreading it anywhere. And so I would definitely encourage people to let your personal network, let your circle, let your cheerleaders know what you're going through. And they can also check you, right? And so if sometimes it's not always the job, right? Sometimes we can be wrong too.
Yeah.
And your friends, your circle will be the people to tell you like, well, Nina, you were tripping. Maybe you shouldn't come to work late every day. Like try to be on time some days.
Yes.
But you know, and I'm not saying that you're late.
No, we'll cut that part.
Look, I know our parents are too similar, okay?
Yeah.
So, you know, your circle will check you, but they will also tell you, like, girl, no, this is not you. That was some bullshit. They said what to you? And they did what? What? Girl! So they will give you a good pulse on what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. And they can also support you in your next move. And then, of course, you know, there are ways that you can network on LinkedIn. And I hate LinkedIn sometimes, but it's also great sometimes.
Yes.
I just hate the stories of like, I went to an interview shoeless and, you know, I had to run and catch a bus and yada, yada, you know, the made up stories that are the superfluous stories. But it's also very helpful. And so there are lots of ways and lots of information about how to network on LinkedIn. If you know a specific company that you want to work for, connecting with people at that company and talking to them, building relationships, etc., are definitely things you can do. But I would really highlight the telling your circle and using your network as the first two things.
That telling, I think, I wonder for some women, like knowing just from my own experience can be easier said than done because the shame that you can feel, like where you feel like you're failing.
Yep.
And you're like, I don't think I can, other than like venting to like my mom or sister or like very close circle of folks, it can feel, or for me, like in this latest transition that I've been in, it felt embarrassing to a certain degree to admit that it didn't work out and like I don't know how to address that. But I was surprised in this, and I think this season has taught me that there are more people that will support you than you think. Like I was genuinely, I probably shouldn't have been surprised, but I was in the moment. I felt genuinely surprised, like reaching out to old supervisors or people that I worked with who were like happy to help and like were super supportive, and like it restored my faith, like in myself and like what I could be doing. So I hear you in that it's important to like have people around you that like can help you like kind of see through the fog, like when you're in a place where like you are questioning your competency. Like I've been a writer my whole life. Like I used to have a column at a newspaper, you know, journalism school and all this stuff. And I remember being in a role where like I started questioning like if I knew how to write like in the English language. And I remember talking to my mom or my cousin about it one day, and they were both like, Nina, it's not you. Like, let's see this differently. So I hear it, and I hope that if women hear this, that they really take that in, to not be afraid to ask for help. So if we're going the other path of like shifting it, you know, let's talk even about your practice, like shifted consulting, like how are you like through your business venture helping organizations and women to like shift their practices and things so that we can have like safer, more fulfilling experiences at work?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you need to assess kind of early on is what is the leadership's appetite for actually making the changes. And so when I was at the organization where we were internally able to change a lot of things, I always believed that the CEO at the time, who was a white man, I always believed that he wanted to do the right thing, but he had no idea how. But the fact that he wanted to gave me the faith that, okay, you know, if we suggest these things, we can make change over time. And it took time. Like, it's not a instant thing. But we were able, every year, we were able to make shifts and changes that improved the organizational culture, that made the culture more equitable and inclusive, and really fostered an environment of belonging. And we did that through a lot of targeted racial identity development training, which again, sometimes organizations are not going to be down for that, right? But I knew for me, if we are not going to be able to fluently and openly talk about race, it's not a place for me. Like, I just know how I am. And when you're working with Black kids, there's no way that you cannot talk about race. And so because I believed that the CEO at that time had the appetite for making the change, it made sense for me to stay and push for those changes. And there was, you know, a lot of strategy and organizing that we had to do. Eventually I got on the leadership team, and there was another Black man, me. We were the only two people of color. And so, at any leadership team meeting, when Charles said something, I was coming right behind him saying, I agree, and yada, yada, yada. When I said something, Charles was coming right behind me. And that's how we were really able to direct the leadership team in the way it needed to go. Because nobody was going to say no if two Black people said we need to do it, and they the only people of color on the team. Like, even if we don't want to, they said it, so we got to do it. And so that's how we were able to make a lot of changes. With my consulting company, I help organizations in a number of ways. So one, we do equity audits where we conduct research to figure out what are the specific gaps that this organization is having in regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. What does it look like, sound like, and feel like at this organization? What does the culture look like and sound like, feel like at this organization? And so, those reports are then used to make changes at the organization, sometimes with our support, sometimes without, but we leave, recommendations and ideas for how to move the work forward. And then I also lead work where we help organizations create that strategic plan that is going to shift the culture. Oftentimes that includes coaching the leadership team. And so with some organizations, I will say, before we can even start on your strategic planning, your entire leadership team needs coaching and development, because you all don't even have the depth and breadth of language and knowledge to even understand what will come out of this report. And so sometimes it's coaching and developing the leadership team. Sometimes it's coaching and developing the entire staff. Sometimes it's leading affinity groups. Sometimes it is teaching people how to start affinity groups and then coaching them on their facilitation. So really, we try to make sure we're meeting the needs of whatever the organization needs.
So what space do you see Shifted going into next?
I don't know. And that's a question that I often think about, because, white supremacy culture tells us that bigger is always better and quantity over quality. And to be a successful business, just more. You got to grow. You got to hire more people. You got to do more stuff. You got to get more money. And I'm just not aligned with that at all. And so I think for me, I want to make sure that Shifted does quality work, that we make tangible changes at organizations so that Black women are thriving. And I hope that I am able to employ people to do great work. One of the things that I also believe and abide by in my company is I don't believe in you do this type of work, so that's less valuable than the work that I do. Or, you're only at this level, so you should make X amount. And anyone that works for my organization gets paid the same rate as me. And so, I think that we also need to change the frame of how we think about business. And if we are truly trying to create more equitable and inclusive spaces, that includes money. And, it's not all about the pizza parties and the we're a family and the t-shirts. That's also about money. And for Black people in particular who are owed reparations by the state, an equitable pay scale would mean that Black employees are making more, right? And so most organizations are not there, and that's okay. But I know for Shifted, I want to be an example of how to do business different. I don't want to do business where, my assistant is making market rate of $35 an hour, but all of my coaches are making $400 an hour. That just will never sit right with me. And so I want to continue to ideate and manifest a different type of work culture, because I think that's what we need.
We're doing the Lord's work. Oh my gosh. You tapped into something that might be going in another direction, but I think it ties in nicely. I forget where I was hearing this, but sometimes I think in social justice work or DEI work, a lot of times we spend so much time like rehashing like what's wrong with it. And I think there's value in that to some degree. Like there is a lot of like trauma that's been inflicted upon our communities that like we need to like continue to talk through and work through and let it come up to the surface so that it can heal. But I think within that, like there is so much, I think like white supremacy culture and capitalism, like it often robs us of having an imagination where like we can't even have a clear vision to be able to even get on the same page after that as to what like a future of like equity and freedom would look like. So I love what you are doing in your practice that is helping people to like kind of crack into that more and like actually dream and say, yeah, it is possible to like do things a different way.
Yeah, Toni Morrison has a quote around that where she essentially says that one of the functions of racism is to keep us so busy and distracted. I was thinking about that when the Little Mermaid trailer dropped, right? And white people were all in a frenzy. And black people spent a week on the internet
debating,
arguing with white folks that's not going to see the movie about whether a fictional character can scientifically be black. I was like, y'all,
we got better things.
Let them have it. We don't have to always jump in. Like, we don't have to take everything on. Let them have it. Okay. Scientifically, she wouldn't be black. Okay, cool. But guess what? Hallie is going to be the Little Mermaid.
It's coming out. When is it? Next month?
You going to buy the doll or not? Because I done bought Zoe every doll, every outfit already, right? But I think that happens to us in micro and macro ways. And again, it's something that we have to stop participating in to some degree, because also with the 24-hour news cycle, with, you getting updates on your phone about what's happening in Japan and Idaho and Mexico and, Belize. It's like there's so much information that we're consuming that you literally cannot take on every fight. And so, to what we were talking about earlier, you can't get an A+ in everything. And so how are you protecting your peace with the frenziness and, the craziness of the world? And how are you making sure that you are not exerting energy in the things that don't matter?
That's real. That's real. I think that's something I had been sitting with. Like earlier this year, I was doing a fast, and part of it, like I had to be off social media for like 40 days. And it's hard to give up Twitter at first, but I haven't really been back since then. And it made me realize like how necessary it was to step back from that. And I understand like there's some value in like not ceding that platform to what it is becoming right now, like due to the new owner. But like, I have felt so much better since I have not been consumed by like what the next like outrage is and all. And that's not to say like I work in communications, like I have to stay engaged with the news in some way, but it has helped me to be much more intentional about how I engage and connect with that. Because I think during the pandemic, I got sucked into that stuff 24/7, between keeping up with the COVID numbers and the election and all that. And part of it was, you did need to stay informed, but it is making me like rethink how to engage with things that like I can't give my energy to all of that. Because if I want to stay in this fight for like the long haul, like I got to be okay like within me for that. So we talked a lot about like career and work and all. What else are you making space for in your life outside of those areas?
Fun, joy, traveling. So I finally got my passport during COVID. Felt like I was late to the party. But yeah, I have learned that I have a love for traveling. And so I was in the Dominican Republic a couple months ago. I'm going to Egypt in June. Can't wait. On the way back from Egypt, we're going to France and London. Okay.
You left that part out earlier. You said Egypt before. Okay. I love this.
So I'm excited to travel. And I've been traveling with Black women. And so I'm in some different Black travel groups, and that has just been a joy to be around Black women. When I went to the Dominican Republic, I had a really like out-of-body experience, because all the people who were like the maids were darker skinned Afro-Latinas. The people who were serving us were lighter skinned Latinas. And they had them wearing like 1980s made outfits, like with the Mary Jane shoes. And most of the people on the resort were white. And I was just like, did I step back to 1950? Like, what is happening? Why do y'all have them dressed like this? What, like, just so easily seeing the segregation. And I remember thinking, like, how many resorts are there like this? Because if you've never been to a resort, like, they literally cater to you hand and foot. Everything is, you know, yes, ma'am, like, you know, yada, yada. And I'm like, these are resorts like this are only in places that are predominantly of color. They're only in, you know, Central American places, Mexico, and some places in Asia have, you know, the same type of resort, but they are primarily in places that are of color because white people get to travel back and be waited on hand and foot by people of color, right? Like, you don't see resorts like that in France. You don't see resorts like that in Italy, and people love Italy, but you're not getting waited on hand and foot by no white folks. And so I was like, ugh, this, like, I don't like this.
I've never been out the country before. I've had my passport for many years, but that's something that, like, I think about a lot. Like, I don't know, sometimes I always feel weird, like, even like at restaurants or like hotels regularly, like asking for things, waiting on things. Like, I try to find like what is that, like, ethical or like middle ground that I feel where, like, I do want to enjoy myself and like have this like experience of hospitality, but like not at the expense of other people, of someone else.
Right. And, you know, we ended up making friends with the people who worked at the resort. And so we also found out that the majority of them live an hour and a half to 2.5 hours away. They can't even afford to live where the resort is unless you are like a manager. And so again, we're like, damn. So we made sure to tip every time we do something, we tipping. And tipping in their currency. You know, at some resorts you don't have to transfer your money because, again, it's just catered to Americans. But we also left the resort and were able to go out to some clubs and things like that with some of the people that worked there. And that, like, we had a great time doing that as well. And so there is there's a lot to think about and to unpack there, because there is a level of American privilege that, you know, all of us have from living here in America. And because America has been the global power for so long, although that power is finally fading away. But because it has been there for so long, there are literal countries who depend on the American dollar. And so who then design entire things for American culture. And so, yeah, I'm definitely not a full-time resorter. I do like them sometimes. And so I know I will probably be back, but I equally like experiences where they're more authentic and you are, you know, experiencing the culture as the people who live there.
I love that. Yeah, this has been wonderful. What else do you want to make space for today?
I want to make more space for myself. I want to make space to continue to prioritize myself. And I thought about that before I said it. And I was like, no, that's what I need to say. Because, again, so often for Black women, we put ourselves last, right? We put our families and our job and our friends and our kids and everything before us. And so I am making more space for me to take up space and for me to be a priority.
I love it, and I love you.
I love you too, Nina, and I'm so proud of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being with me. Brendan, thank you for providing the space
proud
today.
Of you too, baby brother.
I'm just glad. I'm like, yo, like, it's crazy y'all doing this in my crib. I'm like, y'all could easily be on stage getting paid like 50 G's right now. Like, I'm just listening for free right now. Like, remember me when y'all blow up, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's all good. It's all good.
That's what we hope to do. Thank y'all for tuning in. See you next week with another episode. Until then, stay safe, stay in peace, and keep making space for you.